What's going on, my martial arts nerds? Welcome back to System Breakdowns. As always, I'm Greg Koval with Devil Dog Martial Arts, and today we're talking about the best fighter you may not have heard of. And I'm talking about Arnold Almighty Allen. At 28 years old, he already has an 8-fight undefeated win streak in the UFC, giving him one of the longest win streaks in the UFC, and arguably one of the best records in the UFC. So it's very likely that pretty soon you're going to be seeing this guy getting a title shot. So it's worth paying attention to what this guy does that makes him so successful. It does help that he has fantastic genetics. His dad and brother are both powerlifters, and his dad is a former MMA fighter as well, so he's a second-generation MMA fighter. It also helps that he trains at a TriStar gym, so he has a lot of work with Faraz Sahabi and George St. Pierre, and that's part of what makes him so exceptional. And he is fantastic from everywhere. So today we're going to talk about the systems that he puts in place and how he consistently goes back to the same thing that allows him to be so successful. So stay tuned, and let's start breaking down Arnold Allen. Okay, so let's start by talking about his defensive striking tactics and his general tactics for striking. Generally speaking, he is a counter striker at heart. This is what he loves to do. Now, what you're going to see out of him is a boxing-oriented game. It's almost exclusively boxing. He will throw occasional kicks and stuff like that, but he does it with a deliberate intention. For the most part, though, he's a boxer, and this is what he likes to fight using. So what he's going to do is this. Generally, like I said, he's looking for the counter punch. So he is a southpaw fighter who's going to come in here with a little bit of a low shoulder that he uses for a tactical reason in defensive wrestling we'll talk about later. And his front hand is going to be active, allowing him to throw a lot of the jab, both defensively and offensively. He probes with it. He uses it to keep him at bay. He slips it in there. We'll talk about all that later. But the jab's a big part of his game, and he uses it to draw out their attacks. Now, from right here, his footwork, most of his defense is based on framing and footwork. What you're going to generally see is one of two different approaches. Either if they're throwing a rear side attack or some kicks or something like that, you're going to see him back straight up with a frame. This is very similar to what you see out of like a Robert Whittaker, where he's going to bounce. He bounces into range. He gets his range just right. He probes at him. When they throw, he's going to bounce out. Very common tactic. If they throw leg kicks, same thing. So he's very good at evading a lot of that stuff. Now, if they start throwing a lot of lead side attacks or hooks or something like that, what you're going to see instead is you're going to start seeing him pivot on this foot with a high elbow and just do an angle change and then disengage. He generally will disengage and re-engage. And the reason is that he wants to hit the counters on his timing and in the way that he wants. But he does want to stay at just the right range to make it happen. So if guys start giving him a look he's not comfortable with, he's more than happy to disengage. But mostly, he's using this to set up his counters, and it's part of his countering system. Now, let's talk about when he gets pressured. His ideal situation, he wants to be able to leave and circle out as needed, right? And then bounce back in and get his attacks. But sometimes you look at like Nick Lentz, Gilbert Melendez, those are fights where he did not have the space to do that. So instead of trying to run away from these guys who are pressuring him down, he goes, okay, we're going to hold our ground. So what he's going to do is he's going to get to his range, and instead of using footwork, he's going to start holding his ground and using a lot more head movement with the frame instead of footwork with the frame. It's a change in his defensive tactics. He'll use it usually for a round, maybe two. Give them some good counters, make them so that they can't pressure him down so they give up on this, and then he can go back to his A game. But while he's here, you're going to see a lot of stuff like leaning back with the frame, or you see him dropping head with the frame. This is going to give him opportunities for countering with uppercuts and stuff like that. We'll talk about that later. But the other thing you'll see him do, in the Burnell fight, you actually see him using excellent side kicks. I wish he would actually use that more because he got a lot of good use of keeping him at bay with the side kick. You will also see him throw front kicks and stuff like that on occasion and throwing roundhouse kicks as guys step into range. But most of his range management is behind the jab and by bouncing out and staying where he wants to be. He gets to his range, he bounces out. He bounces in, he gets to his range, he works, he bounces out. And this is his game. It's mostly designed for countering, and he is excellent at it. So stay tuned. In the next section, we're going to talk about his striking, both offensive and counter striking. Okay, so let's start with countering because this is kind of his ultimate goal when he fights is he loves to pull out the counters in a safe way. Like I said, he's big on range control. He's going to use his jab to find exactly the range where he wants to have time to respond. He doesn't want to have them be able to just snap a jab at him. So what he's going to do is he's going to stay just outside of range and use this jab as a guide. If they start to get into range, he'll throw the jab down the pipe. But most of the time, he's going to sit just outside of it, and he knows, okay, for them to hit me, they've got to take a big motion. They can't just throw a snap jab and hope to hit. So what he's going to do is, the first thing he wants is, because he's using outside foot dominance, and because he likes to time it as they come in, he likes to time this hook as they come in. That's his favorite thing to do. He throws his probing jabs, he's getting in their face. If they start to get too close, he throws it down the pipe. Then he's sitting here, and then when they come in, pop, he catches them with that hook. Now sometimes he doesn't feel like the timing is right, so he backs out. When he does this, what you'll generally see him do is slide just out of the range of the punch, and then come in with a counter punch of his own. He is very good at timing the distance on this, so that he's just right, he moves just out of range, and throws a counter punch right down the pipe. Generally speaking, you'll see him do one of two things. The most common is he likes to throw that big cross. He's got long arms and a long reach, and he's quick with it, and his timing is perfect, and his distance management is absolute on point. So he's here, he's probing. If he can, he'll hit him here. If not, he comes just out of range, and he throws a counter punch. Sometimes if he needs a little bit of additional range, he'll put a jab behind it too. So he comes out and do a big jab cross, and he'll connect on both. Pop, pop. And when he counters hard, and he's very good at landing it right down the pipe, because he knows that guys are most vulnerable when they're striking. So he waits for them to throw and miss. They're just outside of range, and he catches them. The next thing that happens is we're going to talk about close range countering, because obviously this works on the idea of getting just outside of range, right? You hear pop, pop. He loves that stuff. But sometimes you can't do that. In the case of Gilbert Melendez, what you see a lot of is him here dropping his head and throwing uppercuts. He starts tying it into combos later on. In the next part, we'll talk about combos. But right here, as he's here and the guy starts pressuring forward, he can't back out. So he uses head movement instead. And when he throws, he drops his head and he comes underneath with the uppercut. Sometimes he'll go to the right hand, but it's usually a left hand uppercut he prefers. This he'll use to tie into combinations, tie into offensive attacks and stuff like that. But mostly, he just wants to sit back and catch them. It's an easy attack because as they're coming down the pipe, he can't evade out, so instead he drops. When he gets overrun and guys start to blitz him, my favorite thing that he does is this. He starts putting hands in the face, closing the lane, and then throwing a big hook at the end of it. Sometimes he'll do one hand, sometimes he'll do two hands, but it's an excellent way of dealing with somebody who decides to blitz on you, who decides to start throwing punches, rapid succession, overwhelm you. He goes, okay, he gets in here, he clogs the lane with his hands, he pushes back, and he hits hard. He has landed this a couple times and gotten really solid knockdowns every time he uses it, it seems. One of the common themes you're going to see with this guy is a lot of jawline manipulation. And he does it in his striking as well. As they press forward, he comes in here, he gets overwhelmed, hands down the lane here, and as he disengages, throws a big hook and gets a knockdown. It's a devastating shot. He'll also use this defensively when he starts getting pushed back to the cage. He frames and throws hard. Very effective stuff. So that's the majority of what you're going to see out of his counters. And you can see how it's all kind of range-based. If he can time it early, pop. If he can't, he comes back, counters. If he gets really tight, pop. Or if they start to overwhelm, here, pop. That's basically what you're going to see out of him. Okay, so let's talk about what they do if he starts attacking them and they don't take the countering bait. He's got to get a little bit more offensive. A couple things he does that I really like. So first of all, whenever he disengages and he comes back into range, most people when they come into range, they kind of feel out. What he does that I really like and is something worth putting in your game is as you exit out, he comes in and he immediately goes into the jab. Now, he'll kind of feel it out as he's pressing forward, and at this moment, he decides whether or not to engage it. It's a very quick decision. He comes out, if he feels like they're going to respond, he stops, and he goes back to his countering game. But if he comes in here and they don't respond, he throws it quick and down the pipe. And this is another thing that he's very good at is from the outside, as he's probing, there's a moment where guys are looking to see when they can get stuff off, and he feels that moment when they're about ready to attack, and he uses this to get a quick jab off, and he is excellent at this. Now, sometimes, of course, he'll follow it with a cross, but most of the time, he's kind of sitting on the outside. He feels it out, and he's trying to pull the counter. They're not taking the bait, so pow! If they don't respond to the probing jab, he throws the actual jab, and it's a quick right down the pipe. This is a very effective strategy for him. Now, a couple other things that he likes to do that I really like. One thing he does is, if they're not active enough, he'll increase activity and force them back by throwing some kicks. Right? He'll put it up there, and if they defend it, that's great, but if not, he's getting them to respond, and it's forcing them into an action. So when guys start kind of sitting there too much and he wants to make a move, he likes to throw kicks because it doesn't force him to overcommit. But sometimes he also throws kicks with other purposes, and this is what I really like. So, a couple examples. So, one of the things I really like that he does is sometimes he'll put it behind a jab cross, and he'll follow his cross with the roundhouse kick, very similar to what we talked about with Robert Whitaker, where he comes in here, and he uses that cross to set up his roundhouse kick. It's an excellent strategy that as they're dealing with this high section punch, the kick comes behind it. It's a very nice way of landing a high section roundhouse kick. Other things that he does that I really like is that, and this is where we start getting into blitzing a little bit, at the end of a round he'll often blitz, but sometimes he does it because the guy's not being active enough as well. They're not taking the bait. So he goes, it's time to move on this guy. And one of the things he does is he will start throwing a cross, or he starts throwing some hands, and then instead of throwing the roundhouse kick, he throws this flying roundhouse kick, and he gets really close. And this is where he starts throwing bombs from a very close range. It's his way of closing a gap. And sometimes he'll even tie it with what we talked about before, close range tactic, where he pushes the face away and he hits him hard. And I really like this. And he'll use this to drive them back to the cage. He uses these kicks to move them back. He'll also use, if the guy's fairly backed up, instead of the flying roundhouse, he'll do the flying knee, same intention. And then usually, after he throws a couple punches, he'll back them up. But if they're running away, he'll continue to chase them and get some good shots off. He's very, very good at landing it as guys are trying to run away. The other thing that he likes to do, and this is a combination I want to point out that I really like, we talked about one of his tactics when he has to fight close range is he drop his head and throw this uppercut to the body a lot of times. And what I like is a lot of times he'll start putting it into an offensive combination as well. So he'll either be in here defending and come in here dropping, or he'll start to put it to a combination. And here's the combination I really like. Sometimes he'll throw this uppercut to a jab, but what I really like is sometimes he'll put a pause in it, and it's very similar to what Peter Yan does, where he goes jab, cross, drop, wait for them to move, and then counter punch, right? So he creates an opportunity within it. He does something similar where he goes uppercut, jab, jab, cross. And I really like that. Then he'll mix it up. So he'll go 1, 2, 1, 2. Not the punch counts, just the timing. Sometimes he'll put the pause in. Sometimes he'll also go pop, 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 and just put it all in one. So that mix and timing keeps them guessing. And I really like the way he puts that combination together. But my favorite is really the pause version. And he does this a bunch of times at Gilbert Melendez, where he's in here, he's at his range, and he comes in here, pop, 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 pop. It's a fun combination. So that's the majority of what you're going to see for him when they don't take the bait. He's mostly trying to look for counters, but sometimes he knows he's got to put it on him. So he backs out, pop, he throws this, right? He throws this high roundhouse kick. He's here, pop, 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 pop. And this is the type of stuff you could expect out of him. And he's good at mixing up tempos depending on who he's with. If it's somebody who's trying to put a lot of pressure on him early on, he's going to give them a lot of pressure back and hold his ground. If he has the freedom to move, he's going to make them chase him, move back, and counter punch. It's a fun system. It's a very effective striking system. All right, guys, so in the next section, let's talk a little bit about his tactics against the cage. This is another area where he keeps it very simple. And what I like about his game is he doesn't have a lot of deviations. He's just used to adjusting it for whatever he's against. Generally speaking, whenever he gets somebody against the cage, he engages in one of a couple different things. Sometimes you will see him do like reactive shots and stuff like that, or sometimes, like I said, he throws a combination here where, he throws this attack, and then he starts coming in here and driving him back. He's always good at working the underhook and head control, but what I like that he does a lot of times is he gets in here, and you'll see him put his hand on the cage, and then he reaps out this foot and drops him to the ground. This is a tactic you'll see him employ a lot. Offensively, it's very effective, and if he doesn't get it, he loses nothing, and I think that's why he likes it. Where he comes in here, he gets to the cage, gets his underhook head control, plant a hand here, get a reap, and drop him down. Not overcommitting. Sometimes you'll see him do stuff where he will go for a single leg or something like that, and we'll talk about that in wrestling. Most of his takedowns usually tend to be a body control thing. But sometimes you will see him go for shots. Most of the time it's to put them up against the cage to set up that exact takedown. But sometimes it's also, he gets a single leg and he's just trying to hang out. With Sadiq, he does this, where he gets a single leg because he wants to put him up against the cage and make him work, expend a lot of energy. If he can get a takedown, great. But if not, he's going to make this guy work and he's going to use up time. What you'll see as a trend of his is in the earlier rounds, he generally knows he can outstrike a guy. So sometimes in the third round, he's kind of milking the system a little bit because he's ahead on 2 rounds. He doesn't want to risk getting knocked out. So what he'll do is he'll come in here, he'll get a single leg, and just ride the clock a little bit. This is not something that he's unknown to do, is ride the cage a little bit or ride the ground a little bit to use up time. And it works because guys, once he starts to engage with him on the cage, instead of disengaging and trying to strike with him, they try to turn him into the cage, and he's like, okay, I'll sit with my back to the cage and fight from here. Because he knows if he's up 2 rounds, he could probably get a couple more shots in to finish this round off and get a good win on this round and win 3 rounds, nothing. If he happens to lose this round, so what? He's up 2 rounds and he knows it. But the other side is that he might also just take him down. Like I said, most of the time, if he's in here, he's trying to work to this. But if he feels like this is not going to happen, he disengages and he goes back to his striking. He knows he can outstrike the guy, so if he's working into here and he's trying to wear him down and he feels like it's not going to happen, he frames out and he breaks off. And he's very careful about framing out in a way that he keeps his head safe. Now, defensively against the cage is a different story. I told you we're going to come back to a lot of that head framing. You're going to see this a lot. Him using his hands against the jawline, forearm against the jawline, stuff like that. The other thing you'll see, and I'm going to change the angle a bit, is that one of the things he'll do is he'll start to turn in here. I'll turn this a little bit more. And he'll start to go for a tricep to start to pull them across like an arm drag. And what I like it, he does this to Burnell, and I call it the Burnell guillotine now, is he gets his forearm across. This is a thing that he likes to do. He scoops heads across when he gets back against the cage. You'll see him bring his all the way up to his bicep and turn their head away, working for underhooks and stuff like that. But sometimes he gets to here, and he's looking for that tricep, or he's looking for that head. And what he did to Burnell after getting beat up for 3 rounds, he comes underneath, and it's kind of like a half rear naked choke, half loop choke, half guillotine. I know it's 3 halves, but whatever, it makes a whole. He gets underneath it, comes over top, and he turns them, and he turns Burnell into a really nice finish. It was a very nice technique, and he finished it nicely. But it came off of using his forearm to turn the head away. That is a very common strategy. Otherwise, it's about, he's going to get his forearm in here to turn the head away. It's hard to show on, lower the bob, maybe that'll help. He'll start to get this in here and turn that head away and use this to get his underhooks. And then from there, he'll drive them back to the cage, or he'll circle them in, and then he'll disengage. That's a really common tactic as well. The other thing that he does that I really like is as he starts framing out the head, if he feels like he's not getting here, sometimes he'll do just enough framing to get this head clear so he can get to his overhook. And then what he'll go to is his Haraigoshi or his trip, whatever you want to call it. He'll get an overhook, get a whizzer, get a trip down, and put it right down on the mat. This has worked really well for him. But once again, it comes off of moving that jawline to create space. He's very big on head dominance. When he's up against somebody, his head's underneath. When they're up against him, he's not letting them have control. Either he's trying to get underneath, or he's using his hand or his bicep to create space. And this is going to give him opportunities for pummeling. It's going to give him the overhook, which allows him Haraigoshi and stuff like that. So this is the majority of what you're going to see for him, both offensively and defensively against the cage. Okay, so let's talk about wrestling. Now, we talked about how sometimes he will go for things like a reactive shot or go for a double leg. But most of his takedowns occur in one of 2 areas. Either he gets a guy up against the cage, puts his hand up here, reaps it out, or he's good at getting back to his feet, turning into a guy, and then completing a takedown as he starts to grab a leg and take them down. He starts to get control of the body and start to take them down. He's very good at reshooting when he gets back to his feet, putting them up against the cage, being a threat as he comes up. So while he does shoot, it's not a lot. It's mostly, I think, for a level change or to put the guy up against the wall. He likes grinding him out rather than just trying to go for a takedown in the middle where he just tries to shoot and hope he can get him down. He will sometimes shoot, but he's gotten sprawled on more than he's completed, I think. And I think that where he's had the most success is getting them up, backing them, and working them against the cage. Now, wrestling defense is another matter. His wrestling defense is fantastic. He has excellent defensive skills, and a lot of it comes from wrestling prevention rather than just wrestling defense. And a lot of it works off the same premise as his countering system. So by maintaining range, where you're using this jab as a threat a lot, you're bouncing out a lot, and this shoulder forward, remember we talked about how we're going to come back to this? This then becomes his ability to easily sprawl as this foot comes back to sprawl on top of his opponent. And he's very good at not letting guys get a hold of his legs. Now, in the case of the Burness fight, he was getting taken down over and over again. But what he was able to do is get back to his feet very well. And so it's a nice combination where a lot of fighters are either wrestling defense or get back to your feet. He's wrestling prevention, which gives him the ability to easily defend most takedowns. If they do happen to get hold of his foot, he can often turn out as well because he has a lot of reaction time, just like he does with his counters. When you don't sit in the pocket, it's easy to respond to stuff. And with his low shoulder and his ability to bounce out quickly and already having this as a response, it makes it easy for him to transition this to a sprawl. If he does get taken down, we'll talk about jiu-jitsu in just a second, but like I said, he's very good at getting himself back up to the cage, working himself back up. That is the majority of his strategy. He's very good at getting back to his feet. And what I really like is, like I said, when he gets back to his feet, he's immediately trying to pummel in, get back inside, and he's threatening takedowns of his own. He's putting them up against the cage. He's being offensive from there, and I really like that. So that's the majority of his wrestling defense, and it is excellent. Okay, so from the ground, not a lot to tell. It's pretty simple stuff. From the bottom, if he gets to like a bottom close guard, mostly what you're going to see is he will put his feet on the hips and start using this to threaten, getting his arms up here and starting to attack arm bars and stuff like that. But most of the time what you're going to see is he's going to start looking to get a butterfly hook of some sort, get his feet underneath, get an underhook, and start scrambling up. Or as he gets to here and he gets butterfly hooks, you're going to start to see him use this to get back to a cage, get his underhook, and start getting back to his feet from here. That's his general tactic, is getting up. Butterfly hooks, underhook, get back up. From the top, there's a couple things. Most of it is pretty standard. He gets to a closed guard, and it's a standard punch and, ground and pound. Nothing too crazy. He controls inside position. Half guard, he does kind of the same standard stuff that you can expect to see. He's not really advancing position or submission a lot. He hangs out in half guard, mostly makes him carry his weight and make them work to get back to their feet. Because he knows mostly he's going to collect some points by striking from here, get a couple shots in, get his points, and get back to his feet. He's not really looking to finish on the ground. He's a very capable grappler. He's very good on the ground, especially in scrambles. But mostly, when he gets on top, he's mostly just looking to throw a couple punches and rack up some points. One of the things he does that I think is interesting is that if he does get to a mount, where a lot of guys generally tend to focus on a lot of hip control, right, and start threatening here, Americanas and stuff like that, what you're going to see a lot out of from him is shoulder control and keeping their head pinned up against the cage. So as he moves a guy back, he's going to immobilize their head so that they have nowhere to go, and then it's just throwing shots. And he's not doing anything super damaging. He's mostly just trying to rack up some points and make them work to get back to their feet. And then when they do, he can take them down again against the cage, throw some shots at him, disengage, throws boxing, whatever he wants to do. But his jiu-jitsu, it's best defensively more than anything else. And there's been some times where he was in some really threatening positions. I mean, he's been in some deep darces, guillotine, stuff like that, and he knows to do the right things. Against a darce, it's like a show on the grappling dummy, but like he's using his feet to disengage their feet so that they can't wrap him up, so that way he can go to more of a north-south off of it, like so, and then work from here. Same thing from a guillotine. He's very patient. He gets his hands out, gets his neck out, gets back to his feet. His submission defense is fantastic, and his wrestling defense and his ability to get back to his feet is also fantastic. Really, the hardest fight he's had so far was against Burness, and that was a fight that he got that really fantastic guillotine at the end because he was framing in here. He got underneath the head and was able to wrap it up. And like I said, it was like a rear naked choke, loop choke, you know, kind of a guillotine movement where he got underneath, got over the top of the head, and just turned him back into it. It was great. So that's basically what you're going to see out of him. It's mostly about keeping back to his feet. And this is something I've said time and again. You cannot be a good striker if you can't keep the fight standing. And he is very good at keeping the fight standing. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you share it. And thanks for watching.